All right, guys, Murphs here. And today we're going to discuss revolvers as a classification of weapon. And we're going to address why I consider the revolver to be an expert's weapon, not necessarily something that I would recommend to new shooters. I'm going to go ahead and caveat this right off the bat. The introduction portion of this video is going to take a little bit. So if you're getting kind of bored, you feel like I'm dragging on, go ahead and check the description. You'll find the chapters laid out there, and you go ahead and jump to the actual topics that we're going to be covering. But I do think it's important to go ahead and kind of outline what it is that we're discussing here today, what the parameters and where this kind of stems from to begin with. There are always different trends going on in the Second Amendment community, in the firearms realm and space. And sometimes it's really just a lot of repeating or regurgitating industry talking points, or some hotshot instructor says this thing, so now everyone's jumping through hoops to try to do it. And, trends come and go and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of annoying because sometimes I think a lot of these ideas lack context, and this is a channel built entirely on context. I spend a lot of time evaluating new trends and features and all that kind of stuff and placing it against the wider shooting community and trying to really get into the nuance of why someone might choose this over that and what is something that is more training transparent and all those types of things. Where a lot of that context is lost on instructors or guys at the gun shop, your buddy down the street who's into guns, whatever it is that it may be. So, if I were to walk into a gun shop right now and be like, I want to get a handgun, my first handgun for concealed carry, someone would immediately, it would almost be like a playbook. Someone would crack it open and be like, okay, cool. Well, hey, the SIG P365 holds a bunch of bullets and da-da-da-da-da. And then we would wind up doing this little dance of ergonomics and availability of parts and blah, 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 blah. So those trends, it's kind of a separate subject. It's a rabbit hole I don't really want to get down to. Some of those trends are valid. Some of those trends and some of those recommendations are missing the point. But, and to kind of get into a case in point, the SIG P365. Well, you should get a SIG P365 because it holds, 10 rounds of 9mm in a flush fit magazine. And it's smaller or just the same size as a Glock 43. Why would you get the 43 when, you could have 10 rounds of 9mm instead of 6? Well, I might go with the 43 because it's lighter. And it's it's still super small and all that kind of stuff. And 6 is necessary because I want, I value this lightweight aspect because it's not necessarily, it's maybe more blind to whatever it is that I'm wearing. It's not going to sag on my belt or, pull my pants down or anything like that. Having less ammunition in this case is very advantageous. Those are the things that we should be taking into account whenever it is that we make recommendations. And making recommendations for someone else's self-defense is not a small thing. You're taking an active role in how somebody else survives a potential conflict. That should be taken more seriously. And it definitely requires good contextual thinking. Now, there are some trends that have gone away that I am very pleased with, and that would be revolvers. For the most part, people don't really recommend revolvers for self-defense or duty type use. In terms of duty, the revolver is completely outclassed. When you consider that 3 speed loaders for a full-size revolver would approximate somewhere between 18 and 24 rounds, depending on what it is that you're carrying, which can be easily captured in a single magazine for a semi-auto, for something like a Glock 17. So way less reloading, more ammunition on hand. And when you talk about today's conflicts and stuff like that, in a duty type sense, having that greater amount of ammunition is probably more important for how it is that we train, how it is that a police officer or a soldier expects to have to defend themselves and all that kind of stuff. The greater amount of ammunition is more advantageous. About the only advantage that a full-size duty revolver would have over, say, a Glock 17 or even a Glock 22 or 21, whatever, it doesn't matter, would be the accessibility of the 357 Magnum cartridge. But when we talk about potentially having to engage multiple targets, the current training trend being that you engage a target until it goes all the way down. So as much as the 357 Magnum might be a one-shot stop extraordinaire, it doesn't matter if you've already made the decision through training that anything that deserves to get shot once deserves to get shot 2-3 times. you're going to put more rounds into that person. But now with that higher recoil, are you able to manage, along with your stress, being able to keep it on target and not potentially turning your justified shoot into a homicide investigation? This video is not really focusing on duty type application because, as I said, the revolver is completely outclassed. However, by my own admission in previous revolver videos that I've done, I still consider the revolver to be viable, though marginal, for self-defense type application. And that's where we're going to center around it today. Because the reality of the matter is that there are still some people out there who are recommending revolvers as go-to options for self-defense type applications. And it's something that needs to be addressed. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm saying that there's a lot more thought that needs to go into it. And I've seen it in my comment section. I've had discussions with these people in my comment section, and they generally turn kind of heated. And that's okay. I am not a stranger to arguments. I actually rather enjoy it. So, what we're going to discuss today are the frequently talked about points as to why someone should go after a revolver, why someone should carry a revolver as opposed to a semi-automatic. And we're going to dive deeper into why those points don't hold the water that people think they do. Now, growing up, I was always told that, well, revolvers are more accurate and they're more reliable. Okay, well, there's our first 2 points right there. Now, other people since then have told me that the other pros of using a revolver for self-defense is that you have greater potency of a cartridge, that you have a lot of cartridge interchangeability, and then also a simplified manual of arms. We're going to discuss all 5 of these points in detail moving forward. All right, so first off, accuracy. I have no idea where this belief comes from. I really don't. For the most part, I think it probably centers around like full-size revolvers and single-action triggers. Because, of course, a single-action trigger is lighter and it's easier to be able to get more accurate shots out of. However, it takes longer to use a single action trigger because you have to cock it every time if you want to shoot the gun in single action. And then also the trigger pull is substantially lighter, which is potentially detrimental in a self-defense type situation, in a high stress type situation. In my Firearm Safety Features video, which if you're interested in that, link in the description, I discussed that triggers are not where we derive safety from. And that counts for both heavy and light triggers. However, we do derive surety from a trigger. And a super lightweight trigger is potentially detrimental to the concept of surety. Talking about high stress situations and all that kind of stuff, like we'll take this Ruger Security 6 here, for example. Say that I decide that I'm going to cock the hammer and I'm in this high stress situation where I'm trying to find the opening for my shot. Now, if I keep my finger straight and off the trigger, I'm not potentially going to send a round downrange. That would be true if I had this thing in double action right now as well. However, as I get on the trigger, I could potentially break that shot too early if I come onto that trigger too strong. In a home defense situation, that could mean a dead family member in the next room. In a self-defense situation, that could mean a dead bystander, which now you are the same as the criminal that you're engaging with at that point. You are now a felon because you just killed somebody. At best, you've got like involuntary manslaughter or something along those lines, but no guarantees involved in that. So if we're talking about actually using a gun for defense, we're talking about, and a revolver specifically, we're talking about shooting it in double action. Double action triggers are more difficult to shoot well, especially on revolvers, because you're stuck with double action. It's a lot like a DASA where you just got to manage that one double action pull, and then you've got single action going forward after that. Some people in conventional like firearms instruction, all that kind of stuff, everyone's going to tell you that you need to get on the wall. Well, double action triggers on revolvers don't necessarily have defined walls. Now, there is one in the Smith and Wesson Model 642. However, it is still faster to shoot, to just power through, to just roll through that wall, kind of like an AK trigger, than it is to try to stage up on the wall. It's faster and it can still be just as accurate. Jerry Mitchell does it that way. I do it that way. We discussed that in my revolver shooting video, which if you're interested in that, link in the description. Where was I? I distracted myself with the link in the description thing. Regardless, you get that rhythm down and you can still stack good hits. However, it's going to take more time than a semi-auto that perhaps has like a striker fire trigger and is able to be consistently shot on the same cadence with a lighter trigger pull. That's not too light. It's one of the big things. You know, whenever we talk about light triggers and stuff like that, you don't necessarily want a super lightweight competition trigger in your defensive firearm for the same reasons that we mentioned before. Now, also, when we're talking about concealed carry guns, it's very important to remember that concealed carry means that it is concealed in all circumstances. You're not printing, you're not like wearing it under a jacket where you're gonna like expose it when you go for your wallet or something along those lines. Actual concealment. So that generally means really small guns, like the Smith and Wesson Model 642, like the Smith and Wesson Model 36, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. These guns don't really fill the hand, so it might be kind of difficult to be able to shoot this accurately like you would a larger gun. It's the same type of deal if we're talking about that 43 versus like a Glock 17. But with this gun, I can still put 5 rounds in a zone at normal combat distances. You can still do it, it's just not going to necessarily look as neat and tight as another handgun of semi-auto of the same size. Gun moves around in the hand too much. You don't necessarily have the best sights, which let's go ahead and talk about sights here for a little bit because that's also a big portion of being able to shoot a gun well. This revolver, gutter sights. The 642, gutter sights. You'll also note that our front sights don't really have any contrast. These guns cannot be adapted to tritium sights or anything with higher contrast or anything like that. These are milled parts of the barrel. You would have to like cut those off and remill the gun in order to be able to put a different sight on it. Now, that's not the case on everything. There are several more modern options that you can replace it. The Ruger LCR, you can replace the front sights on. You can get good prominent sights, but there are fewer options available. When you talk about semi-autos, you talk about Glocks, you talk about M&Ps, you talk about SIGs, you can get all kinds of aftermarket sights. You don't like the stock sights that it came with? Take them off. Go ahead and get something that's steel, that has a ledge in order to be able to help you conduct one-handed manipulations, that have high visibility sights, that have night sights, something along those lines. You try to use these guns in a night encounter where you have no illumination, these are potentially very problematic for that type of application. It could really impact your ability to be able to effectively defend yourself. So that's a really big disadvantage when we're talking about carry-sized revolvers. Now, kind of an anecdotal case in point. I used to attend a range that had a really good training program quite frequently. I would actually wind up taking like 5 classes there. I did 2 defensive rifle classes and 3 defensive handgun classes. And they had one gentleman there who had retired from Metro PD, from a Metro PD, and in his time at that police department, he had been, a revolver had been the department standard, and then eventually they transitioned over to semi-autos. So they did offer courses on shooting revolvers. However, they were by request only, but he was one of the instructors. So I'm at this pistol course, getting back on track. I'm at this pistol course. We're shooting bill drills. He comes out and demonstrates a bill drill for the class with his Glock 17. And then a little while later, he decides that he wants to kind of challenge himself. He brought his Smith and Wesson 686 that he kind of had tricked out with him to the range that day. So he strapped up with a 686, shot that bill drill again. Now, he did those in fairly comparable timing. However, his lateral dispersion on his group from his Smith and Wesson 686 was much wider. And a lot of that comes down to manipulating that double action trigger. So he shot a much tighter group with the Glock 17. Not a shock. But there's implications in this little anecdotal story that are going to play a big portion in our conclusions coming up. All right, so that's the accuracy portion of this. I have no idea where that comes from. I don't think it has any basis in reality. It's also pretty subjective, but so are a lot of these points. What about reliability? Yes, revolvers are absolutely steadfast reliable. They still can fail. A lot of those failures will be user-induced in some form or function of another. Could also be ammunition related. You can have those same types of problems in semi-autos. However, this is a data point that held more water in 1984, 1994, maybe even as early as 2004 or as late as 2004, depending on how it is that you look at it. However, when we look at the availability and when we look at the array of firearms that are available today, semi-automatic handguns are incredibly reliable. I myself have zero issue with buying a Glock at a store and throwing in a holster before I walk out the front door of that establishment. Like, I would be completely comfortable with that. I've had so few failures on Glocks, especially new ones, that it doesn't really even pop up on my radar. I wouldn't necessarily say that for everything in the industry, but there are quite a few options that I would absolutely trust right out of the box, CZ among them. However, once upon a time, the manufacturer's recommendation of X number of rounds of break-in was actually necessary. Kimbers, it's still most definitely necessary on, from what I hear. I've never bought and worked with a new Kimber, but from what I understand, they can be quite finicky coming out of the box. And there's like many manufacturers still recommend that you go through a break-in period prior to utilizing your firearm for defensive type purposes, but I'm not a big fan of that as a concept, because now not only do I have the cost of the gun and, you know, transfer fees and all that kind of stuff, FFL background check fees, but now I also have to incur like the cost of 500 rounds of ammunition before my gun's good to go. That seems a little silly to me. I'm not very happy with that. In the modern day, revolver and semi-auto reliability is not that different. Especially when you then put it up against the capacity of a semi-auto. When you put it up against the manual of arms of a semi-auto, which we'll get into that more here in a bit. All of those things outweigh the negatives of the potential for a problem with reliability in a semi-auto. It's not the flex that a lot of people seem to think it is. Yes, revolvers are very reliable. I've still had failures in revolvers. If you don't close up the cylinder properly when you're coming off a reload, if you don't allow the trigger all the way out whenever it is that you're going through shooting and stuff like that, you can still induce little malfunctions. They're pretty easy to fix, but if you have a ammunition related issue, it could wind up being pretty catastrophic as far as like gun being completely deadlined. All right, so that's the reliability discussion. Why don't we go ahead and talk about the power aspect? Revolvers are generally accredited with just being more powerful than semi-auto handguns, and in some cases that's true. If you're talking about 357 or 44 Magnum, those cartridges are absolutely more powerful. Both of those cartridges, by the way, have been previously discussed on the channel, link in the description. However, when you go down to what I would consider to be the minimum defensive cartridge that I would carry in a revolver, which would be 38 Special, it's honestly not that more powerful. Which we discussed that in the 38 Special video, as well as the family of 38s video. Links in the description. You guys can tell I've done like a lot of stuff with revolvers in the past. 38 Special, if you look at energy and velocity and all that kind of stuff, really isn't putting up that impressive of numbers. Like, you still have effectively performing 38 Special when it comes to wound channel and all that kind of stuff, but there's nothing that makes it more powerful than a 9mm or a 40 Smith and Wesson. It's actually anemic in comparison. It's just good bullet construction that makes it perform well. And that's why you have plus Ps and plus P plus, which was an attempt to keep the 38 Special relevant in the duty and defensive space. It hasn't apparently worked all that well because it's all been replaced with modern semi-autos. Just because the 38 Special is longer than a 9mm doesn't make it more powerful. If anything, it makes it less efficient, which, not necessarily a big topic of discussion in this case, but it's still a data point. When we're talking about defensive cartridges, I would not exceed 44 Special in a defensive revolver. 44 Magnum in an actual carry size revolver is a lot of cartridge. You're talking about like the 329 PDs, Smith and Wesson 329 PD. That's a very lightweight gun and actually has like a shelf life. You're supposed to send it back frequently to get serviced by Smith and Wesson if you're actually shooting it a lot. Those have an application if you're talking about woods defense or something along those lines, but I would not necessarily recommend that, especially for a new shooter, as a woods defense gun. When you get into smaller, lighter guns and the 357 Magnum, that has its own constrictions that are associated with it. And this was something that we discussed in the 357 Magnum viability video for self-defense use, which link in the description. When I pair a 357 Magnum with a sub 25 ounce gun, I generate a ton of recoil. And then also out of the shorter barrel, I have a lot of muzzle flash and report and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be a very loud gun. It's going to be a flashbang going off in my face every time I pull the trigger. You're talking about a new shooter. This is going to induce bad habits. This is going to create flinch. This is going to create anticipation of the shot and all that kind of stuff. And those are very difficult habits to break once they're introduced. James Reeves did a review, I can't remember what revolver it was, a while back, doing a whole day of drills with 357 Magnum. And while he managed to negotiate the drills just fine, he did mention that it was a lot of effort, that it was really having to harp on a lot of fundamentals and basics and all that kind of stuff. It was not nearly as easy as doing it, the same drills and training regimen with a 9mm. Even something light like the Smith and Wesson Model 642 with 38 plus Ps, this thing is uncomfortable to shoot. This is about a 19-ounce gun, and it is incredibly uncomfortable to shoot with 38 plus Ps. A range day with this gun and 38 plus Ps wears my hand out. I would much rather shoot standard pressure ammunition through it, but it can use plus Ps, and I would like to get the additional performance of a plus P in a defensive type cartridge. I have the Smith and Wesson Model 36 for the standard pressure ammunition. This is also a much heavier gun. Now, of course, heavy guns have their own relationship with restriction whenever it comes to concealed carry because if it's weighing down your pants or if it's uncomfortable and stuff like that. A heavy gun can be problematic for just the day-to-day carry because you spend a lot more time carrying your gun than you spend shooting your gun. That's for sure. All right, so there's our kind of like pros and cons whenever it is that we're talking about the efficacy of a 38 Special, of cartridges in revolvers. 357 Magnum, fantastic fighting cartridge, but doesn't make it an automatic choice for the aforementioned reasons. 9mm, 40, 45, still effective. Still have the same fight-stopping characteristics that 357 Magnum can accrue. There's still loads out there that you can get that have effective expansion and penetration and all those types of things, and the higher capacity. Faster mag changes. We'll get into that here in a minute. All right, so now let's talk about ammunition interchangeability. I hear this quoted all the time. Well, I can get a 38, I can get a 357, and then I can shoot 38 Special, 38 Smith and Wesson, 38 Colt. I can shoot all these different cartridges out of it, or 44 Magnum and 44 Special and 44 Russian and da-da-da-da-da and all this kind of stuff. And it's really not that helpful. There is a very niche set of circumstances where that is beneficial. And if we're in a situation where we have another ammo rush, which is no doubt going to happen again at some point, and you can't find 357 or 38 Special, but you happen to come across some 38 Smith & Wesson, yes, sure, now you can at least have something to shoot out of your gun. Maybe in some sort of dystopian end-of-the-world type situation, that would also be advantageous. However, 38 Smith & Wesson's not in production anymore. Neither is 38 Colt. You're not just going to find that stuff sitting on the shelf at most gun shops. I do run across some of those kind of outdated niche cartridges upon occasion, but it's like pawn shops or really, really old stores. It's not something, and those boxes just sit there because it turns out not a lot of people are shooting those particular cartridges. You hear this all the time with like the 327 Federal Magnum. Like, oh, well, you can shoot 32 H&R mag, you can shoot 32 long, 32 short. You can shoot all these different 32s in it. Like, sick. All of those are expensive, and a lot of them are really hard to find. So that's not the versatility flex that you think it is. It's really not that helpful, even with ammunition prices coming down. Right now, I managed to pick up some 38 Special for a really good price the other day. It was like $22 a box. Generally, I've been seeing 38 Special for around $30 a box. I can buy 2 boxes of 9mm for that same cost. It's not even getting a 357 Magnum, or should you decide to go so far as 44 Special and beyond. That ammunition only goes up. It's like $36 a box for 357 Magnum, like training loads right now. Once you get to 44s, you're getting over $40 a box. You get to 45 Colts, you're getting over $50 a box. Like, and that 45 Colt ammunition that's over $50 a box isn't even defensive loads. Okay, that ammunition, all of the stuff is incredibly expensive, and my 9mm or a 40 Smith and Wesson stretches my dollar so much further, which means more ammunition on hand, which means more time for training. We'll get into that more here in a minute. It means ultimately more proficiency. I remember, kind of another anecdotal story. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was looking to buy something new. He wanted to generate some cash and decided, he was looking at his collection, deciding what it was he was going to get rid of in order to buy some new stuff. And he was trying to decide between his Ruger Super Red Hawk and his Ruger Red Hawk, chambered 454 Casull and 44 Magnum, respectively. Now, I thought the answer was really obvious because 454 Casull was super expensive, and so is 45 Long Colt. Like, I don't even need to say anything. This is very obvious. My dad picked me up one day and he goes, hey, I sold the Red Hawk. Why did you sell the Red Hawk? He's like, well, your uncle brought up that, the 454 Casull, I can shoot 454 and 45 Colt, and, you can get like lots of like really good hunting loads and stuff like that for the 45 Colt. And at the time, we were convinced that we were going to handgun hunt. Jumping ahead, it never happened. But that was what he was considering at the time. And I was like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but like 44 Magnum and 44 Special are way less expensive. And the thing that I wasn't really thinking about at the time, but like now taking that a step further, and are also going to perform optimally in the same engagement distance in handgun hunting. I'm not going to be able to, when we're talking about ethical shooting and all that kind of stuff, I'm probably not going to take a 454 Casull any further than I'm going to take a 44 Magnum, and we're talking about hunting whitetail. We're not hunting bear. Like, once we get over 357 Magnum, it's all the same. That was not the last time that he would make a decision that would not make any sense to me, but it was among the first. Okay, so there's our interchangeability discussion. Now let's get down to the real meat of the matter, which is going to lead us into our conclusion, and that is manual of arms. Oh, well, revolver's simpler. You don't have safeties that you have to manipulate. There's not a magazine release or a slide release or anything like that. You just pick it up and bang, good to go. While that might be true for rounds 1 through 5, once it becomes time to reload, things get a lot more complicated. Revolver reloads are not nearly as streamlined as semi-automatic handgun reloads, and you have to do more of them because of the lower capacity, depending on what type of situation you're in. In addition to that, your method of carrying that ammunition plays a really big part. Everyone's going to go ahead and just hop to use speed loaders. Duh, it's going to be like super fast. However, that's not entirely true. While this speed loader has zero issue fitting up against the cylinder with the Smith and Wesson Model 642, when it comes to this Smith and Wesson Model 36 and having rounds actually loaded up in here, this grip gets in the way. That's why I carry speed strips whenever it is I'm carrying. Also, they're flatter, so they don't necessarily stand out as much in a pocket. This gun's slower to reload. And honestly, this gun's not necessarily that much faster. I've done timed comparisons between the two, and there's really not that much difference. Now, I also have done a video comparing revolvers and semi-autos out on the range. If you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. But when it comes to the process of reloading and all that kind of stuff, it's far more involved with the hands as opposed to with a semi-auto like this Glock 26. And then it's just a question, after you get that magazine in there, it's just a question of, do I overhand rack? Do I slingshot? Do I slide? Do I use my firing thumb for the slide release? Do I use my support hand for the slide release? Anything after that is just deciding your manual of arms of working around the gun. It is much faster. And then trying to do the same thing with this. This is where I get the term, or I guess term is the proper application of the word here. This is where I get simple complexity from. This gun, very simple, but there are more things involved in getting it, in keeping it in the fight. In addition to that, if you're talking about somebody who maybe has diminished hand strength, not necessarily like injury or arthritis or anything along those lines, but more like they're an itty bitty thing, be it man or woman, it doesn't really matter. And spending, a day on the range, actually getting in good reps and all that kind of stuff on a double action trigger might wear their fingers out. They may not be able to necessarily stay in that. While that's not necessarily a consideration in the short term, it is a consideration for the long term when it comes to training and all those types of things. Now, this is where someone will say, well, all you got to do is train around that manual of arms and then you're good to go. This is where we jump to kind of the conclusions portion of this, guys. It is a cop-out to sight training, because as somebody who shoots every weekend, who goes to courses, who competes quite frequently, I can tell you that the vast majority of the firearms community does not train that much. Even concealed carry holders and all that kind of stuff. They do not train nearly as much as they think they do and you think they would. Most people maybe shoot a couple hundred rounds a year. That is not setting them up well if they decide that they're gonna take somebody's recommendation and start carrying a revolver. They are now walking around with a sense of false security in this case. Yes, training is what matters, but when you look at cost, when you look at the additional steps in the manual of arms in order to be able to do that, how do you streamline that training at that point? Whereas 9mm gets me double the amount of ammunition for the same cost, which means more time out on the range, more time shooting a cartridge that's actually enjoyable to shoot, depending on the size and weight of the revolver that you're looking at. And then also more streamlined reloads and other types of, malfunction clears, manual of arms, all that kind of stuff. It's the same thing whenever we talk about like AKs versus ARs. If you take somebody who shoots an AK every day, right, trains on it, runs it really good, and then they put that same amount of time into the AR, they would get so much more result for their time spent with the AR than with the AK. Now, there are plenty of people out there who can run AKs absolutely fantastic, but when we're talking about hours, man hours applied to that training, they would get more from a simpler, more ergonomic and streamlined system. And that's the bottom line up front. Now, up front, we're pretty much at the end of the video. Now, if I take this Glock 26 and this Smith and Wesson Model 642, put them up against each other, we can see here the guns are very much so comparable in size. The 42 is maybe a little slimmer. They both weigh about the same unloaded. I can fit more ammunition into this gun. I have the faster reloads, and it is easier for me to shoot this accurately. Why would I go with this when I could have this? Now, guys, in the videos that I've talked about previously with 38 Special, with revolvers, I am very comfortable with revolvers. That's because I shoot revolvers a lot. I spend a lot of time training around the platform in order to be able to be comfortable with it. But if you told me I was walking into a gunfight tomorrow, I would not bring this. I honestly wouldn't even bring this. But I would probably wind up taking something like this or one of its bigger brothers. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.